From analog.
Hi, Jim. You've a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
You're digital.
We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Good evening, everybody. This is WB2K-TV. My name is Steve. I'm located in New York City. It is my pleasure to host this month's edition of the CQ Blind Hams Tech Zoom. We get together each month and talk about amateur radio from a blindness perspective on Zoom, where we do a podcast format. We put it up on YouTube. It also becomes a podcast that you can download using your favorite podcatcher of choice on your favorite platform of choice. And the YouTube channel, when we have a video presentation, there is video that goes along with it. So sometimes there's audio, and sometimes there's audio and video. This month we have the pleasure of Billy Irwin, who will talk to us a little bit about SkyWarn. But before we do that, I want to introduce the other members of the podcast team. I would start with Angelo, but he's off taking care of other business, but he'll be back. He's here in the background, helping us out and providing the Zoom facilities for us. Thank you very much, Angelo. Robert in College Station, Texas. Say good evening to the podcast.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here. It's Robert, NC5R, Old College Station. Looking forward to this SkyWarn presentation. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Robert. And now over to Julian, our number one Californian, who is in Florida this week. And
Yes.
What's happening?
Yes. Not much. Just took a little trip down here to beautiful Southwest Florida to spend a little time here with my family and some friends that I have down here. So enjoying the beautiful weather and looking forward to this very informative discussion.
And I'll turn it over to Joel.
Don't know why there's no sun up in the sky. Stormy weather.
And that kind of dovetails right into the topic of tonight's conversation. We're going to talk about SkyWarn. And to introduce tonight's special guest is Joel W0CAS.
Hello, Steve and everybody on the podcast. This is Joel down in Pelzer, South Carolina, and I'm pleased to introduce our host tonight. I ran across Billy on the SkyWarn net that we have here that Billy's responsible for organizing. And Billy is the South Carolina SkyWarn coordinator. I believe I got that title right. Plus, he's got many other hats, but that's what I know him for right now. And we'll give it to Billy, K9OH. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to the group. And I figure I'll give everybody a little bit of my background. So first of all, I started out with an interest in meteorology right after Hurricane Hugo, which happened in 1989. And I was about somewhere about, I think, 7 or 8 years old, and really just became fascinated in weather. And by the time I hit the age of 12, I became interested in meteorology in a more serious level after having a meteorology section in science class, and started immediately volunteering for our local National Weather Service office, which is in Greer, South Carolina, and is affectionately called the Greenville-Spartanburg Weather Service Forecast Office. And that office covers a large portion of western North Carolina, almost half the state of South Carolina, and 6 counties in northeast Georgia. And that does include the Charlotte metro area in North Carolina, the Asheville area in western North Carolina, Greenville, Spartanburg, Rock Hill, and then, like I said, 6 counties. They're mostly rural counties right along the South Carolina-Georgia border, which is kind of part of the Savannah River chain. But after volunteering with them a little bit, I also ended up making contact with the local meteorologist at the CBS affiliate, WSPA, and began providing them weather information on their evening newscasts on TV. as a teenager, and I was one of the most frequent volunteers that they would call for local weather reports. This was kind of as the internet was just becoming a thing. And I was one of the rare few volunteers that had a full weather station at their disposal. So I could actually provide wind speed and other things that some of the other volunteers only had rain gauges and thermometers. So I became friends with the meteorologist over there, and they'd frequently send me stuff. And kind of a funny side note to that, at that time I did not have a weather alert radio, and they were doing a contest, and I just made a phone call over there one day and said, "Hey, I'm blind. I'm not going to really be able to send a postcard, but hey, would you just put my name in the drawing?" He said, "I'll do you one better. I'll just send you a weather radio." So that was my first weather radio, and got interested in how all that worked behind the scenes. And back at this time, they were not using the what ended up becoming the console replacement system, which was the first automated voice using the deck talk board. They were still at the time doing this by hand. And so the radio part of it also was extremely fascinating for me at that young age. And so I actually got to attend the grand opening of their new forecast office when they installed a lot of this stuff, and got to see some really cool and interesting things as a young person, especially, being visually impaired. So kind of jumping ahead. So about the time I turned 18, I became a licensed amateur radio operator, decided I wanted to do SkyWarnTech, and the local county emergency coordinator appointed me as an assistant emergency coordinator and put me in charge of the local weather nets that we had. And I think the second year after having my ham license, my mentor, recommended that I take ownership of the repeater that covered the county. And so I went and got money together and bought the repeater from the original owner. And I've had that same frequency in my possession since 2004. And I have since then acquired several repeaters and have linked them together with voice over IP. And the entire mission of all this was purely for SkyWarn purposes, as well as Aries. And so throughout that time in my ham career, I ended up serving as various different counties that I lived in, as my jobs would move me from place to place. I served as from everything as an assistant emergency coordinator to emergency coordinator to district emergency coordinator, all the way up to my most recent position I held for 6 years, serving as the South Carolina State Section Emergency Coordinator, and worked with the South Carolina Emergency Management Division, the National Weather Service, many other agencies, county, local, federal, state, just tons of different agencies that I've had the privilege and pleasure of serving with in the amateur community. And I decided that after taking on my professional career, I'm a cybersecurity manager for the local government here. And so that taking on that new role took a lot of time. So I stepped down, and now I'm serving as an assistant section manager for our ARL section here in South Carolina, solely focused on SkyWarn related matters. And in this new role, one of the things that I'm doing is working with the National Weather Service office in Charleston, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, the Greenville-Spartanburg office, and the office in Wilmington, North Carolina, which covers Myrtle Beach and the Grand Strand and some of our northeast counties in the state, to come up with a unified SkyWarn communications plan for the amateur community and building the procedures so that we're going to sort of beta test it, if you will, to see if we can get everybody playing to the same sheet of music, if you will, because in the past, each individual NWS office sort of did their own thing and did it slightly different. And that creates issues in the amateur community. that I think we could resolve. So in all of that, we have been able to make some improvements. We're still very much early in that process because I've been in this position now a year. But now to get into so what is SkyWarn and how does it work for those that may not know? The idea behind the SkyWarn program initially started in the 1950s when volunteers would report ground truth information, which is, information that they see at their location to local National Weather Service offices. And back at that time, there was actually a lot more NWS offices than there are now. And they would essentially, if they saw a funnel cloud or tornado, or they had large hail, or certain amounts of snow, depending on the area, because each area's criteria is a little bit different, they would then phone that in to the Weather Service office. And as time went on, amateur radio became a crucial part of that. It also became a crucial part of hurricanes. And those of you may have heard the Hurricane WatchNet. That is kind of sort of a part of SkyWarn. They do run that as its own entity to a certain degree because they also have to serve outside of the National Weather Service, providing information between the National Hurricane Center and various other international locations. So as time went on, the program grew and amateur radio grew, 2 meter ham frequencies became available. And next thing you know, as time moves on, you start having SkyWarn nets on repeaters, and you got a lot more interest from the volunteer community to provide weather information to the Weather Service so that they could take that information when technology such as Doppler radar and satellites could not see right down to the ground level what was going on, and they could get that ground truth, which helped them produce warning information for the areas that they cover. They could produce that information faster. And technology has improved vastly because of that, and amongst other studies that folks at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, and those at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, which is co-located with the SPC, they're producing new technology all the time. However, amateur radio continues to prove very valid for this program and very important. We actually had a situation recently here in our area that one of our other net controllers that I trained about 10 years ago, I had a little bit more vision at the time, so I trained him on advanced radar methodologies, techniques, how to, basically duplicate what NWS does. And while that is not necessarily what SkyWarn does, one of the things that we do a little bit different on our net is we also try to inform the amateur operators out in the field. We do have some operators that actually do go out and chase. While that's not encouraged, they choose to do that at their own discretion. So when we activate our nets, in this particular situation, the net controller saw something on radar that was concerning to him that appeared to be rotation. And so he was able to notify ham that showed up. We have the data basically where the radar is overlapped with all of our SkyWarn operators on the screen. So he was able to look and see where this guy was, let him know that there was rotation nearby. And he called us back a couple minutes later and confirmed we did have a tornado on the ground with damage. And the National Weather Service had not even put out a warning yet. And so it allowed them to issue a warning later to at least warn others as it approached. Now, that being said, it wasn't like the tornadoes you see out in the Midwest and Great Plains, but it was still enough to cause some significant damage. So the way our program also works is I own 3 repeaters. One in Greenville, South Carolina, one in Rock Hill, and one in Columbia. They are tied together over a private microwave network that is provided by a third party, and they allowed us to route our traffic along their network. It uses the All-Star software, but the connections between the three repeaters are kept on that microwave so that the internet is not a factor of whether it's up or down for the linking of that. We also have another system that is tied to this. So our system is a part of this system, and it's called the Wide Area Repeater Network System. And during severe weather, we link about 15 other repeaters in, and there's a couple more repeaters being added as we speak. So the system has grown very extensively and is completely public safety and SkyWarn driven. We do treat it like public safety communications. Part of the techniques that we use come from my background as a former 911 telecommunicator, as well as assistant to an emergency management director. I've basically been in and out of government employment for about the last 20 years. So I think that pretty much kind of tells you where we are and what we do. I would definitely be open to any questions you may have about how we do what we do, and you can kind of steer the conversation at your discretion.
Well, this is one of the questions. The very first question that I would have is, in your beginning description, you use the word coordinator a lot. What is it that you coordinate, and how do you do it? And most importantly, for this podcast, how do you do that as a visually impaired person?
Sure. So at being an emergency coordinator at the various different levels is really focused on communications. And how you do that really depends on the personality of each individual person that you're bringing into your group and pulling those folks together. So one of the things that I specifically would do is really keep it an open dialogue and let each net controller that reported to me, or each volunteer for that matter, I wanted them to be a part of the decision-making process. So I would kind of put them all together, if you will. And sometimes it's kind of like herding cats, but by the end of the day, when you get everybody together and get everybody used to each other and get them all understanding the direction you want to go, it turns from herding cats to a fine-tuned machine, if you will. So training the net controllers and the assistants and the volunteers in various communications methods. One of the things that we require is that they take the National Incident Management System courses, ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800. So I would make sure that their training was in our database, make sure that we as a group of volunteers are meeting the expectations of the served agencies. So there's a lot of meetings involved. You have to show your value to the served agency, and you also have to let your volunteers know that while yes, they're giving of their time, you also have to give them something that they get in return. We all volunteer, but what are we getting out of it for our individual, interest, if you will? And that varies from individual to individual. So they got to get a return on investment too. So it's, in some ways, it's almost like pleasing everybody to a certain extent, but you kind of have to measure your ability to do that, because you obviously can't please everybody, but you do really try hard and try to make a functioning organization, grow and, keep obtaining new volunteers and that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Perfectly.
One question I got, Billy, you talked to me about a week ago talking about how they document reports. So the net controllers document reports entered into some system you were mentioning, and that goes directly to the National Weather Service.
Sure. So the National Weather Service has a program called NWS Chat, which allows net controllers that have been vetted access to the government-based chat system. In the back end, it uses Slack, so it is accessible. So those blind hams that may want to be a net controller, we certainly I especially certainly support and encourage hams that are visually impaired to be involved in that. There's certainly a place for blind hams to be involved in it, because one of the things we do in our nets, we have two net controllers simultaneously. One net controller is supposed to take weather information that is being put out. So if there's a severe thunderstorm or tornado warning, that net controller is the one reading the pertinent information out over the net. They're supposed to summarize it, not read the entire text, make it short so that if somebody has to report something, they can. The other ham, and this is where I think most of all the visually impaired person can participate and be very helpful, is taking down the report. So you type it in on the computer. In their chat room, they have a custom form that pops up, and it's not a very complicated form. I myself am a JAWS user, and I do it through JAWS and have no issues doing it when I run net control. And there's times I run net control and do both duties, but it's not to say anybody couldn't do it. I've been doing it for a really long time, and it can be a pain trying to read with JAWS and read over the radio at the same time. But I've come up with unique ways for me to make it work. But it's, when assistive technology wants to, function correctly. And there is another visually impaired ham that occasionally will help us out with nets and stuff when he's available. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely doable. And the Weather Service is very supportive of me doing what I do for them, as well as, providing me information. So it's been a very rewarding experience. In fact, I was recently contacted about the Weather Service is going to completely redo their website to make it WCAG 2.0 compliant. And I was selected as one of the folks that gets to be involved in helping them do that. So I'm looking forward to doing that. If any of y'all ever run across something, you got comment on it, I'm certainly willing to pass that along. Hopefully that also answered your question as well.
Where would folks go that want to listen to this sort of thing in action and maybe begin to learn how to participate in it?
Sure. There's a couple things you could do. We have one repeater that is currently streaming our nets on Broadcastify. It is under the call sign N4LRD. So you could go on Broadcastify and listen to that there. We also do have Echolink, and we are on All-Star. I don't have the node numbers right handy where I can read them off, but I'm most certainly willing to get those to you.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sure we can find them.
Yeah. So the node numbers or the call sign is under K9OH. If you connect to the Greenville repeater, that one is on Echolink and All-Star. And I do welcome anybody that wants to check into our weekly nets. They're every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 Eastern. So anybody can check in and listen to that net, and you're more than welcome to connect up and listen during potential severe weather in these areas to hear how we do things during actual operation. The way our nets run during severe weather, I should have mentioned, is that we have kind of two modes of operation. We have a standby net. Anybody can kind of check into that net when there's a chance of severe weather. If there's nothing going on, it's purely at the net controller's discretion. But if we have multiple severe thunderstorm warnings simultaneously, we go kind of more into an alert mode. You could think of it as a more directed net where we limit traffic. If one tornado warning is issued, that's an automatic. We go into that mode where all traffic has to be relayed through net control, so that anything that goes on, it can be relayed through. Definitely, we'd definitely encourage anybody that's interested to listen to our nets.
Okay, now I'm not in where you are. I'm up in New York City, and I'm sure lots of other people on this podcast, both online with us right now and listening to us right now, are in lots of different places. Where do those outside of your area go to find these things?
The best place to go is to your local National Weather Service office. The SkyWarn program is their program. We have an MOU nationally from the Amateur Radio Relay League with the main National Weather Service office headquarters. So most, if not all, weather service offices in your area have a SkyWarn page, and they should be able to tell you at a minimum what groups are in the area that do what we do. And they would either have links to those websites. Some of them even have the frequencies right there. But that's up to each individual office as to how that page is laid out. But that's the first place to really start.
Great. And what, if you wouldn't mind, what is an MOU?
That is a memorandum of understanding, and that agreement simply lays out what each party is willing to do for one another during activations and the ongoing relationship.
Great. I know it's something I'm going to look into and listen in for. I mean, we don't get a lot of severe weather up here, thankfully, but when we do, I'll certainly know where to go to find information about it.
Most definitely, and I can tell you from someone who has lived up in the Seattle and Portland, Oregon areas to back down to the southeast where I am now, I've seen severe weather pretty much just about everywhere I've ever been. It does happen. It is a lot more rare, but tornadoes can occur, albeit that they are rare. California, Oregon, Washington, I'm most certainly in New York, Maine. Yeah, they don't occur often like they do in other places, but they certainly can occur. And we do tell everybody to always stay weather aware. If they're calling for some sort of severe weather, usually they're, unfortunately the media is going to hype it up a little bit more than they probably should. But at the same time, just being aware is one of the key things. And, a lot of people, unfortunately, underestimate what a severe thunderstorm is and what it is capable of. Winds in excess of 58 miles an hour constitutes a severe thunderstorm. And most of the time, if you hear a warning, they usually say the storm's capable of winds of 60 miles an hour is how the warnings typically read. Sometimes they'll say more if they expect more, but that's about all it takes to cause some really wild damage. 60-mile-an-hour winds can uproot trees. And if you're standing under a tree and it falls on you, you're probably not going to survive it. So, again, weather aware is really important. Lightning, is another one of nature's leading killers. If, you're outside and you hear thunder, then you're within range of, potential being struck by the next, lightning bolt. Getting a weather radio is another thing, especially if you're in an area that's more prone to severe weather. Highly recommend that. It's definitely good for those of us visually impaired because it's probably the easiest way to get a forecast without having to navigate through any of the other technologies out there. The only unfortunate part is you're going to have to listen to it go through its cycle, but you really get a lot of useful information off of weather radio. And then, you can have it programmed to alert you only for your county or all the counties around you or however you want to have it programmed. They also do alert for child missing emergencies, different things like that. So if you like to build your disaster kits, certainly make a weather radio a part of that.
And we
This is
also
Robert, NC5R. I'm down in College Station, Texas, Billy, and I had recently I use an all-star node called a clear node, and recently the clear node Node Ventures folks added SkyWarn Plus to the clear node configuration. So it's now easy to set up SkyWarn Plus if you have a clear node. And when you set it up, you get the opportunity to choose what kind of weather alerts you want. And then when a weather alert comes in, your node will alert you that an event is happening, and you can query it using touch tone commands and get more information about that alert. And I just wondered, that seems like I haven't had it set up for very long, and I've only heard one alert so far, but that seems like a really accessible way for a blind, visually impaired all-star user to access SkyWarn Plus. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about that, just anything about SkyWarn Plus, what you think about it, how it works, and so forth. Just kind of dovetailing on my comment.
Sure. I have not personally interacted with it other than I have heard a couple of hams that I work with that have a node at work, and they have it set up on theirs. And at least the one that I recalled hearing, it offered a very limited amount of information. But I am thinking that they added an update to it. I think it's a good idea, with one caveat. I probably would not depend on it for a life-threatening situation, just simply because it, uses the internet to get its data. So, and a lot of people will use their nodes tied to their iPhone or Android device as a means to get that internet stream. However, there was a situation here in South Carolina about 3 years ago now, I guess. We had a tornado, and it was a very large and violent tornado, go through an area in the lower part of the state. And when that happened, the tornado struck the cell tower and completely and utterly wiped the cell site off the map. When it did that, the warning had not quite went out yet, but there was a housing development just east of where the tower was and in the path of the tornado. And people, used the alerting on their phones to get weather information. And unfortunately, those people in that housing development did not get the warning because the cell phone tower that would have provided it was completely destroyed before the warning went out. So the good thing about the weather radio, at least, is you're going to get it from a much more fortified radio tower, if you will, than a typical small cell site. But for day to day, absolutely, I think those can be really useful.
Yeah, it's a really great point you're making, and of course, I'm a member of my local Aries group here in College Station, Texas, and one of the things that we tend to use here for passing traffic is WinLink mail. And unfortunately, at this moment, at least as far as I know, WinLink is not very accessible unless you use an app on your cell phone that gives you access to WinLink. But again, you've got the internet problem. So that's something that I hope we make progress on.
I couldn't agree more. I found that I was very held back. I really, when I was the section emergency coordinator and in my current role, there's definitely valid use cases for WinLink, and I'm very supportive of it. However, I face the same barriers that you're describing. And I've raised some questions, but I haven't had the free time lately to pursue pushing it. But it really is a tool that we need access to, and will do everything I can to support recommending to those folks that we get that done. And I do have a contact because we along with North Carolina heavily use WinLink in our Aries program. And while I couldn't, take advantage of it, I was still able to coordinate and do the other duties that I needed to do. And I just, unfortunately, had to rely on other assistants to provide me with the information.
Well, there is good news. I was talking to a ham yesterday who told me that there was a person right now developing JAWS scripts for WinLink to make it accessible on the PC. So hopefully that will come forward and we'll get some better access. Anyway, thank you very much. I'll step back now and let someone else ask questions, but I appreciate your thoughts.
No, thank you. I thought those were very good questions.
And good evening, Mark here.
K1BZ? K1BZ?
I think the K1 station. I'll grab you first. Go ahead.
Thank you. We have a number. Well, let me back up a second. K1BZ, name is Margaret, and I'm in Dartmouth, Mass, and I'm I've known KD1CY for a number of years and been SkyWarn trained by Rob. But we have a number of people with Tempest weather stations. And is there a way of sending like the NWSs or the SkyWarns? Would any of them be interested in that type of data? Because I know the company has a whole network of all of the Tempest weather stations, so you can go in on different websites and look at anybody's weather. So would that be of value to SkyWarn? And I will mute for the answer.
Sure. Any weather data, as long as it's good quality data, is valid for them. One of the things, so if you have been SkyWarn trained and you know the reporting criteria and you see that on your weather station, they most certainly want to be made aware of it. But I will also tell you that many weather stations, and I would not be surprised if the Tempest does not do this, I would imagine that it would. The Weather Service themselves actually look at many of these other third-party networks, if you will, for weather information. And by you being a registered SkyWarn spotter and you reporting the data to that network, as well as there's other networks, I think one comes to mind is Spotter Network, and there's many others that I can't think of right now, but you could tie your weather station to many of these other programs. There's also another program that kind of goes hand in hand that allows you to take the weather information that you have at your disposal and you can report it on your phone every day. I'm drawing a blank at the moment on what that program is called, but anybody could be a part of it. It's a relatively new program that's only been out for a couple of years, and I can certainly get that together. But you can report your daily precipitation amount and some very other things, and that is allowing them to do long-term climate data. And the Weather Service also has a co-op program as well, where you can volunteer and they provide their weather or their weather hardware for you to be a co-op observer if there's not already one in your area. If they already have one, they won't, obviously put another one out there. But yes, any data you can provide is extremely important, and I think they would value having it available to them.
Does anyone hear me here?
Yes, Mark, you're up next. Mark, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You're up next.
Oh, thank you, Steve. And hi, Billy. Good to hear you in here. I think maybe you were you maybe thinking about Coco Ross?
Yes, that's exactly it. It popped in my head about the time you said it too. So yes, the Coco Ross program is a really nice program as well.
Yeah, Nolan Doskin. I get his emails, and I'm the problem I noticed with them is they like you to use their rain gauges, and I'm trying to work to see if maybe that can get changed a little bit to where we can use the rainfall totals from the Tempest because of being sightless, so we're using that. And I'm quite a weather enthusiast myself, and I'm sorry that I got here late. I had some family situations that I had to listen to, and great. I just wanted to say great to hear you on here this evening and wealth of information.
Mark is our resident weather watcher.
Well, it's definitely nice to meet you, and it's certainly my pleasure to share knowledge amongst the blind ham community. It's definitely been interesting, as I alluded to earlier, making my way through this. I actually considered a career in meteorology. I know a totally blind meteorologist at the Climate Data Prediction Center, or not Prediction Center, the Climate Data Center here in Asheville, North Carolina. I think she's still employed. She may be close, if not retired by now, but, a blind person can certainly go into that career field, but it is challenging given everything that has to be looked at. The National Weather Service uses a software package called AWIPS, and I actually run that software here at my residence, as well as some other software. And AWIPS is free and open source as long as you have a connection to a AWIPS server, and there is a publicly available one out there. And it's mostly accessible, and that's partly, I think, due to the fact that the federal government requires that their stuff be 508. But I've at least heard of 2 blind meteorologists. I think the other one was more visually impaired, and I'm wanting to say he might have been in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but it does definitely make it a little bit more hard to do what meteorologists do. But I decided to stick to it more as a hobby. One of the ways I learned meteorology at a almost collegiate level is 2 things. I personally ended up, my dad was in the military, and he gave me a copy of the Meteorology for Army Aviators manual that they train their meteorology folks and pilots with. And so I studied that when I was 12 years old. And as time went on, I somehow landed on a complete set of a gentleman's meteorology course, every course he took from UCLA. And so I sat down and watched the videos. He was actually very descriptive too. So between that and the SkyWarn classes that I've probably taken over 100 SkyWarn classes, because of being the coordinator, I'd have to be at those classes to support my folks. But you always learn something new every time. So every chance you get, if they offer a class, go take it again. But that also helps you make relationships. And that's the best thing about amateur radio, especially for the blind community who doesn't necessarily get the opportunity to be mobile. I will tell you that amateur radio has given me every professional career job that I've had was through every contact I made in amateur radio. So I always try to share that piece of information to every ham, especially every blind ham that I meet. It's a great networking tool to meet people in whatever it is you're interested in.
I've always found that the ham community represents just about the best of the best in just about anything you can think of.
I couldn't agree more. I've been very blessed to make the contacts. But my current job now as a cybersecurity manager was purely based on the fact that, I had the knowledge, and that's the other thing is if you say you know something, I hope you know it, But by having the contacts that I had, they found out that I was in the area, and I have extensive communications background. I've done IT and radio communications for 911 centers in various counties throughout North and South Carolina. And as many of you know, radio programming has gotten a lot harder with a lot of the software accessibility issues. But I've always kind of been on the network systems admin side of the house as well as the radio. I couldn't completely give up one for the other up until my vision got to where I had to be totally reliant on a screen reader. And so it just so happened that the manager of the local radio shop for our county here found out that I had moved back to the area because I took another IT job with another government agency, and said, we are desperately in need of a microwave engineer and a systems admin. are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, sure. What you got? And the next thing I know, I'm over cybersecurity. So, and I got really lucky that I'm in a place where they don't treat me any different than anybody else that's on the team. And just in the 2 years that I've been at this agency, I've been promoted and just very well taken care of by that organization. So I always, like I say, networking amongst the hams. You take care of them, they'll take care of you.
Yes, sir. I can sometime, I won't do it now, of course, but sometime somebody, and anybody on this network, Joel could probably even just tell you the story of what I went through when I tried to contact Anytone and explain to them what accessibility meant in order to implement a better code plug software for their radios, or even to talk about the firmware for their radio. They just didn't get it whatsoever. And I think it was more than just a language barrier.
I think, one of the things, it's sort of related to job interviews that I've been in over the years. I have come to a conclusion that most people, the first thing they think about when they look at a person with a disability is, oh my gosh, if I was disabled, they're coming in here wanting to do X, Y, and Z, whether it's use any tone software to program it. Yeah, their mindset is, if I were blind today, there's no way I could do that. So why am I going to, work so hard to try to make it where this guy could do what I just don't feel like there's no way he could do it. I don't think it's necessarily always that they just don't want to do it, or while that certainly exists, and I've certainly experienced that as well, what I have found in my experience most of the time is people just, it's hard to fathom. So usually I preface a lot of my approaches with people in the emergency management community, the IT community, the ham community, and so on. The folks that I speak to, I always tell them, look, if you were blind today, you couldn't do my job. You couldn't put servers in a rack. You couldn't climb a tower. You couldn't do anything because you haven't learned how to do that. You haven't been rehabbed yet. So yes, you're absolutely right. You're not going to, if you lost your vision today, you certainly could not function today, but you would learn. And those of us that have lived this way for an extended amount of time or our entire life, we have found ways to do what you do a different way. Then they start to open their mind up when you do that, and you kind of start building that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, a friend of mine always says, it's easy, but it's hard, but we make it look easy. That's our job.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it.
Well, does anybody else have any questions or comments for Mr. Irwin? Everybody's always telling me I'm too fast on the key, so I'm giving them nice long time.
I've had that problem too, and sometimes they may say I'm a little long-winded, but I will also add, not to toot my own horn, but just to point out the nice recognition that I was privileged to be interviewed for QST. So I forget, it was in 2020, because I had just had COVID when they interviewed me, but you're certainly, I think the December edition of QST of that year, ARL interviewed me, and you could hear more about the story and how all this kind of came to be. They did a really nice job putting that article together. And I thought it was a real privilege to be recognized for the contributions to amateur radio that I was able to do at that time, but to also the contributions that amateur radio gave to me as a visually impaired person. I thought it was really cool that they saw, what I did is equally, if not more important than, the rest of the community as far as Aries goes. And I just couldn't be more appreciative. And it was fun doing that. So, I would encourage those that are interested in volunteering to give it your all. Somebody's going to give you a chance at some point.
That's true. That's very true. Well, on behalf of the Blind Hams Tech Zoom people, I would like to thank you very much for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts and wisdom on SkyWarn. I'm going to get back to Joel for any final thoughts before we close.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Billy, for coming in and taking your time. I know the net was going on right before we started the Zoom, and we probably missed a couple of things going on in the net, but it's been my pleasure to meet you and acquire some of your knowledge. And now we're sharing it with everybody on the Blind Ham. I thank you for coming, and we'll stay in touch. And if you got some information you want to send to me, when I can put in the show note, some of the things you might have mentioned, program training, anything that you would like to add, to be glad to add them. It takes us a couple of days, usually by Saturday, and ready at 7:03, everybody. Thanks for
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and visit www.blindhams.com.